Welcome to learning more about LCPS EL student cultures. I'm Markel Atkins, one of the HRTD instructional coaches, and I'll be sharing some information with you today. First, let's go over our agenda. We're going to first look at some of the enrollment data here in the county. Then we're going to look at exploring our own identity markers and how we see the world. And finally, we'll explore some of the different cultures within the county using ProQuest culturegrams. So let's take a look at LCPS student data. As of last year, 14,639 of our 81,326 total students were identified as English learners. This accounts for 18% of our total student population. In the school year 2018-2019, our number of EL students surpassed our number of students with individualized education plans, as you can see in this chart here. The top language that our students identify with is Spanish, with 51% of our families identifying their home language as Spanish. A combined amount of 12% speaking Telugu and Urdu, and a combined amount of 10% speaking Arabic and Farsi. So those are our top 5 languages here within the county. Most or a majority of our students come from Central and very top of South America, as well as parts of Asia, specifically from what we consider the Middle East, as well as India and Pakistan. Before we start exploring some of the cultures within our county, I really would like you to take a moment to do a reflection activity about your own identity. You will not be sharing this information out as a group or sharing this information with anyone else. This is simply a reflection activity for you. So within Schoology, if you'll click on the link, which will make a forced copy, and then if you'll read over page 1, the information given there by the author, Elena Aguilar, and then finally fill out the chart on page 2, which is called Reflecting on Our Identity Markers. You'll put an X in each box that applies, and you'll finish up by answering the reflection questions on page 3. Once you go to this activity, I ask that you pause this video and complete it. All 3 steps. Read the first page, do the check boxes, answer the reflecting questions, and then you can come back and push play on this video again. So please pause the video now. Welcome back. So essentially, we see this world through the lens of identity markers. All of us have biases and stereotypes that can affect how we see other cultures and races, how we see our students, their families. So it's really important that we consider these lenses and how they serve us as a teacher. This is not saying that you're bad because you have certain biases or certain stereotypes or you were raised a certain way. What this is saying is that we all have what these essentially might be blind spots as we're viewing other cultures. And so it's really important for us to be open to learning about our own biases so that we can try to work against them and really make sure that we're meeting all of our students where they are. So by increasing our own cultural competence, it's more than just learning about another culture. It's also about exploring how we feel about other cultures and possible misconceptions that might prevent us from interacting with students and families from various cultures. So it's really about just getting to know yourself more and how our identity markers might influence how we see, experience, and understand the world. So keeping in mind your own identity markers, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the different cultures that our student families come from. As we look at these different cultures, I want you to keep in mind this question. How might my identity markers influence my interactions with my students? All right, so I just want to model for you how you can access culturegrams So you're first going to log into your LCPS Go account. And from there, you're going to find library resources. Within library resources, you'll see one that's called ProQuest Culturegrams. If you'll click on this app, it'll take you to the link. All right, so now that you are in Culturegrams, you'll see there is a kids edition and a world edition. We're going to go into the world edition, but I have used the kids edition quite often with my EL students to have them research their own countries in English and prepare like a report or a project in order to tell the class more about their culture. But we're going to go in and look at some of the features that the World Edition has, which is the adult version. As you can see at the top of this website, they are pictures from different cultures, slideshows. I really like the videos and the interviews from different cultures. The interviews is quite neat because it interviews people of all different ages from the different cultures. And so it truly helps you to see the culture through their eyes as they've experienced it. I do want to warn you as or say as we're looking at all of this, all of these resources, it's really important that you note that this information will fit many of your students coming from these countries. But just like we have very different cultures all around in different areas of the US, different countries also have different cultures. So this resource doesn't replace getting to know your students and their family. It's just a starting point to have a better understanding of what their culture might be. So I'm going to go back to the main page and we're going to look at the World Edition. And I'm going to show you the pieces that I usually look at first when I find out that I have a student from a certain culture. So the first region that we're going to look at is actually in North America. And if you come down here below Mexico, we're going to go to El Salvador. Many of our students in the past decade, maybe even a little longer, have come to us from El Salvador. And as you can see on the side of this, there's lots of information that you can learn about El Salvador, about their people, their language, their religion, how they generally dress in different regions. Where I usually like to start for sake of time, because we often have many students from many different cultures, is looking at their greetings, gestures, and their education. So if we go to El Salvador and look at their greetings, we can see that in city areas, it's customary for people to give a brief, firm handshake, maybe nod a greeting, which is very common here in the United States as well. It's also not unusual when people see a friend, whether they be male or female, to give them a hug and maybe a kiss on the cheek. And then it says weaker handshakes are common in rural areas. So again, this isn't going to fit everywhere, but this is going to kind of give you an idea of some of the ways people in El Salvador or people from this culture might greet each other. Also, if you go to gestures, you can see and hear that touching the tip of the thumb and the index finger together while facing the palm inward means money, but facing the palm outward means okay. So, and that's something, you know, in the United States, it means okay to face it outwards, but we don't have it be money when it's facing inward. So just, you know, little things like that can help you with some of the nuances of your students' mannerisms. And all right, the next thing I would look at is the education, just to kind of see what it's like. So one thing to notice is that the mean years of schooling, the average of schooling is 7 years. So that means students and adults alike, on average, only receive 7 years of education. There are lots of reasons for this. Some of them is that they don't have access to the education, as you can read here, that, you know, you have to pay fees in order to go to school. It's not free like it is here. And even if it is free, you may not have the resources you need to get there. For example, if you're in a very rural area, you may not have transportation in order to get to the nearest town or city in order to attend the local school there. You may not have shoes, and most of the schools require you to wear shoes. You may not have the materials that you need, paper and pencil and things like that. So there are definitely a lot of issues with access to education in El Salvador. Another thing that I've learned from some of my families that have come from El Salvador, that they don't have substitute teachers in their culture. And, yes, I understand we're in a sub shortage here, which is making things difficult, but there they just don't have any substitutes. So a student may walk an hour to the nearest town to go to school and show up, and then the teacher's not there, so there just isn't school that day. So then they have to walk an hour home. So that can be very defeating to students who have to commute long distances by foot. So again, those are three of the areas that I kind of look at. There's lots more that you can read in here. Culturegrams is, a wealth of information, but just to kind of give me some basic understandings, those are the three areas I generally tend to look at. When we go back, the next area that I'd like to look at is Afghanistan, which is going to be in the region in Asia, but if we break it down further, it's in the Middle East. So we actually are seeing a large increase in the number of Afghani students we have due to the current political struggles in their country. A lot of the refugees will be coming to schools here in Northern Virginia. So it is a good demographic to definitely try to learn a little bit more about their culture. Before I was aware of culturegrams or had looked into it, significantly, I did have a student who actually came from Afghanistan, and I quickly made a mistake with him, as is common, and apologized after. But it's very typical for me when I'm walking around the classroom teaching that if a student needs me to spell something, I'll just take their pencil and I'll just write it on their paper. Or if they need help with a math problem, I might take the pencil and show them how to do that part of the math problem. And I never really thought about it until I had this student from Afghanistan, and I went to take his pencil and he immediately dropped his pencil and jumped back. And I knew that I had done something wrong. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I knew that I'd made a mistake. So I had just briefly heard about culturegrams, but hadn't explored it very much. So I went in and started looking so I could try to figure out what it was so that the next day I could address this with the student and apologize and kind of try to change whatever it was that I had done that made him uncomfortable. And so upon reading this, I saw that it's very common for people from Islamic backgrounds that non-familial men and women do not touch. So by my reaching for the pencil, he was afraid I was going to touch him, which would have broken their custom in Islam. So after reading this and kind of getting like a little bit more of a, understanding of what might be going on, I talked to the student and I said, "Hey, I noticed yesterday when I went to grab your pencil, you kind of like jumped back. Were you worried I was going to touch you?" And he's like, and he just nodded yes. And I said, "I'm so sorry. I won't do that anymore." And then after that, I changed my practice. I just made sure that I carried a pencil or a pen around with me so I had something to write with. And I made sure my students were aware if I was going to come down and write on their paper so that there didn't have to be any close calls or any worry that they would accidentally touch me when they shouldn't. And another practice I changed because of that is I'm a back patter. So, I started off as an elementary teacher, moved to middle school. And if my students are working hard and I can tell they're, really struggling on something, but they're pushing through, I'd always just pat them on the back, like, good job. Well, after learning about this, I realized, wow, I'm not being very culturally appropriate with these students. So again, I made a mistake in the past. That doesn't make me a bad person. I didn't know. But then once I did know, then I had to try to do better. So just really, kind of trying to read these over. And that doesn't mean you're going to be an expert. It doesn't mean you're going to do everything perfect. It just means that you're open to trying to learn more things so that you can better support your students and their families and make them feel more comfortable. And then again, I would encourage you to look through the education. So in Afghanistan, the average years of schooling is 4 years, and their adult literacy rate is less than 50%. So keeping some of these things in mind as you're sending home materials for the students to work on, or if you're sending things home in Farsi. So pick up the phone, make a call, use the translator. You can get a translator from the county. There's a list of translators. Go ahead and use them. Use Language Line, which is free, and they'll get somebody who speaks Farsi and translate for you. try to make those phone calls or those in-person meetings with translators so that you can make sure that your parents have access to the information. For sake of time, I'm going to allow you to explore India or India and Pakistan on your own. I encourage you to ask your newcomer Els what countries they come from and or where their families are from, and explore their country here on Culturegrams, and then have a conversation with them. Hey, I read on Culturegrams that it's rude for me to shake with my left hand. Does your family do that? So that you can kind of figure out, like, does that fit with your students' culture or not? It's a way to kind of open up those doors. So it doesn't replace getting to know your students. It's just a starting point for you to have some better understanding. So you can find a copy of this slide deck in the Schoology course. And in there is also a link, a live link on the slide on how to access ProQuest Culturegrams with screen grabs in case you're not sure. And then there also is an article with more strategies of how you can build your cultural competence and how you can use that to help build relationships with students in the classroom. I just quickly want to talk a little bit about microaggressions and what they are. Microaggressions are not something that we do intentionally, usually. Normally, microaggressions are comments and actions that unintentionally discriminate against marginalized groups. But just because they're unintentional doesn't mean that they hurt less. So some that I've actually heard teachers here in Loudoun County say are, "Oh, you're EL, but you speak English so well." Well, so that's like, or even looking at somebody who maybe looks a little different from you, or is a marginalized group, and being like, "Oh, you speak English really well." Well, that's like saying to them, "Well, you're not really from here. You're not American." Where a lot of our Ls have been here, they were born here, they've gone to school here since kindergarten, but they may still be struggling with the reading and writing domain of English. So they might not have an accent. They might, be able to listen and speak and comprehend what you're saying, but their academic vocabulary may be a little bit lower. So just going by that, isn't really the tell that you want to, isn't really how you want to evaluate them. Asking them questions like, where are you from? Now, this is why I said, like, with your newcomer students, you could ask them where they're from, because we know that they've come in recently from another country. However, if you're working with higher level working Ls, just because they look Asian or they look Middle Eastern or they look Hispanic, you don't want to just start off with, where are you from? A gentler thing would be, hey, I'm trying to learn more about my students, asking all of your students, your entire class. I'm trying to learn more about all of my students so I can know more about you. I want you to spend 15 minutes writing to me about what cultures you identify with. So giving them a chance to share, because maybe they don't identify with El Salvador. Maybe they identify with Virginia. So giving them the chance to tell you that information, and then you can kind of move forward from there. And I made a mistake with this one. I'll give you another example of a mistake I made, because we all make mistakes and that's okay. As a coach here in Northern Virginia, most of the teachers have moved in from someplace else. It's a very transient area. I originally came from Northern New York. My husband's originally from Texas. We moved here from Texas. So, and I know very few people who were actually born and raised in Northern Virginia. So when I'm starting to build a relationship with my novices, one of my questions is always, where are you from? Meaning, what state did you move here from? Because you're probably not from Northern Virginia. I said that to a novice who was wearing a hijab, and I could very much immediately tell by the change in her mannerisms that she took that as me saying, you're not from here. You must be a foreigner. What country are you from? You're not American, when that was not my intent. But I immediately was able to read her body language. And I just said, whoa, I'm so sorry. That did not come out the way I intended. What I meant was, everyone moves in here from somewhere else. Most people in here move here from someplace else. I moved here from Texas. My husband's from Texas. I originally was from Northern New York. All my coworkers are from Pennsylvania. Did you grow up in Northern Virginia, or did you move here from somewhere else? And she immediately relaxed, smiled, and said, oh, I actually moved here from New York as well. So, see, the question was not completely off base, but it was heard differently than I intended it. But that didn't make it less hurtful for her. And so it was important for me to apologize and then move forward. And then finally, another thing is don't ask people of color or marginalized people to speak for their whole race, because one person from El Salvador's experience could be very different from another student from El Salvador's experience. Just like my experience in Northern New York as a white woman was very different than my mother in law's experience as a white woman in Texas. So both of those are in the United States, two very different regions, and just how we had different experiences. So don't ask them, like, hey, do you think somebody from El Salvador would like this lesson? Or, hey, do you think it's okay to do this? They can't speak for everyone, they can speak for themselves. So just be careful, because they're not all the same. None of us are all the same, and we can't all speak for all people who identify like us. If you want to know more about microaggressions, or if you've never heard about it at all, PBS has a great video that you can find the link to in the corner of this slide that explains what microaggressions are and how they affect our students. So where do we go from here? Equity is a journey. You need to be compassionate with yourself and your students. We're all going to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to apologize and move forward. When you know better, do better. Continue to be curious. Be open to learning about ways to increase your cultural competence and improve equity for all of our students and their families. We all have a responsibility to work internally on ourselves in order to better serve the students we teach. Thank you for taking the time to work through this training. If you have any questions, please email me. My email is on the screen. I would also like you to take a moment to go ahead and scan the QR code and fill out the Google form so that I can give you credit in MLP for attending. If you cannot access the QR code, the Google form is also within the Schoology course, and you can fill that out to make sure that you get full credit for this training. Thank you for attending. I look forward to seeing you in future trainings.